Those who persevere to the end shall be saved. Okay, so I want to talk some about methods, and we're going to have to sort of cut some stuff here in the interest of time, but to talk about some of these a bit, and then eventually get on to the question about congregations and congregational life as a learning community and something about Bible study before we finish. But to do some more about methods, there's a variety. These are the ones that are particularly in the notes. There's a lot more. My class and I made a list of 60, and this is just sort of simplified because some of the things that I think get used more and can be used more, I was thinking of our context at Regent a bit in doing this. We are going to talk about lectures and TED Talks is a variation on lecture, of course. And a little bit about the flipped classroom, a little bit about why, what makes PowerPoint good or bad? Is PowerPoint truly evil, as some people think? And as time allows, discussion and some case study, a little bit about tutorial, a little bit about mentoring as a learning strategy. So let me just sort of cut to the chase. Go to page 105, which is in the section on methods, which is on the section on lectures. And my argument would be that lecture is often overdone, overused. It's overused in education, it's overused in higher education, and it's often, dare I say it, overused in the church. The church has often imitated the practices of the prestigious forms of pedagogy of the wider culture. And if you attach prestige and value to a lecture method at a university level, you then import that into the church very broadly. The question is lecture really a good way to learn? Well, the answer is, for some things, it can be excellent if it's well done. Like virtually every other method, these can be done well and they can be done poorly. Right? I have known of really great lectures and really terrible ones. I've known of really good discussions where I learned a lot and really terrible ones. Right? Case study, tutorial, everything. I mean, all this can be good and all of this can be bad. I'm going to try to paint a more idealized picture. We could spell out all the ways these things can go wrong as well. That would be a fairly depressing exercise. But what do these things sort of at their best promise, right? So lecture has been under quite a lot of attack in North America anyway. And a few people, including some of the articles I cite here by Molly Worth and Alex Small, for instance, are short articles that are really springing into the defense of lecture. But it strikes me that what we have to really do is try to figure out what are lectures good for and what are they not good for. So this is where the middle of page 105, Peter Frederick, The Lively Lecture, 8 Variations is the name of his article, and you could probably just Google that if you wanted to read it somewhere. When done well, the best lectures impart new information. Okay? Now, part of the critique, and it's where, in a sense, lecture is most vulnerable to the attack, is that people will argue that it's not the best way to convey lots of detailed content, data type information. Because it's not very efficient, and it is not very memorable. And there's better ways to take on lots of data, lots of information, than to lecture through all of it. So this is actually where I can say something about the flipped classroom pedagogy, which actually BGST is using quite a lot, right? So what does that mean? That means that the relationship between homework and in class gets flipped. So the idea there is record lecture material that the student can listen to on their own time in preparation for coming into class, so that the class time can be engaged, can be interactive, can be discussion, can be case study, can be discussion, can be interaction, can be problem solving, can be in things like what Pacwa teaches. You can have an introductory lecture about Augustine, let's say, but then you can actually spend time picking apart and putting back together some primary source text by Augustine, some sermon of Augustine or something like that, right? Which really is a better use of the time. right? That's the way BGST has worked. That's why we do some classes that way at Regent. I think there's a lot of promise in that. So listen on your own time, and then come to class engaged and ready to go. But in terms of, just back to my point about data, right, covering lots of detailed content at the passing of information level, if we mean by that information that actually could be better read in the book, is probably better read in the book, right? So why do what the book can do, right? In other words, covering lots of basic stuff is not the best use of the time. Okay? So when Peter Frederick talks about imparting new information, my little critique in the section below there is, well, let's be a little bit careful about that's happening. To have you copy down lots of basic information is not a particularly good use of the time. You're not going to remember it very much. You're going to actually be better off if you can read it somewhere and hang on to it and do it outside of class, or listen to an introduction to Augustine to set the stage for doing the exercise you're going to do in class. So yes, imparting new information of a kind, but look at really what that means. It means, for instance, number B here, explain, clarify, organize difficult concepts. That's a much higher order task that calls for a higher level of expertise than just going through the basic data, right? It's sifting, sorting, organizing. How do you think about this subject, right? What's the right framework to put around it? What are the competing theories within this? What are 4 different ways to go at this subject matter, right? Those are things that you're not going to find at just the baseline of facts level, right? It's not something you're likely to find in the book either. Right? So organizing, clarifying, right? Model a creative mind at work. This is his language, not mine. Or the problem-solving process. It's just, in a sense, this is the bringing of expertise to bear upon something. So that if you're a theological student and you haven't read anything by the Church Fathers yet, it's a really valuable exercise to have Pacwa take you through a sermon of Augustine and learn how to do that. Because there's skills involved in that. It's just not like taking any old book off the shelf, right? And I'm not saying that to flatter him. This is just the value of this kind of education. So it's a really good thing to sort of bring the expertise that someone has to bear upon, okay, let's do this. Let's read this text together. Right? Let's solve this problem together. In more technical fields, it's problem solving. Right? We do this approach at Regent with some language courses, so that basically it's not going over the matters of Greek grammar in class, it's listening to stuff and doing the work with your book and coming to class with a hands-on problem solving, let's do stuff together, right? So it's more engaged, more interactive, more involved, more hands-on, more practical, more for application. Right? Which fits a lot of what I've been talking about here as active engagement stuff. Right? So you're trying to create the good preparatory conditions to get active engagement to actually happen. Right? So that's where this logic of the flipped classroom comes in. It's a very promising thing. Is it magic? No, it's not magic. It's good for certain things, better than others. But the point about the lecture piece is what you're trying to do in well-used lecture, I think, is model something, demonstrate something, bring skills to bear on something that you just can't read in the book, that it takes actually some real knowledge of the subject to actually put together. Right? That's how these are used a lot better. Analyze and show the relationship between dissimilar ideas. Inspire a reverence for learning. That's an interesting one. So some of this is inspirational. Right? What does that mean? It's not just jumping up and down and saying, rah, rah, Augustine is great. It's entertaining a process and a learning that actually builds excitement because it's so good and so rich, it's so meaningful to people, right? That will actually generate a sense along these lines. But notice what that's doing is that's setting up a dynamic of lifelong learning, of motivation and interest, right? This is the taste and see Augustine is good. You might want to actually keep learning more from Augustine or other church fathers or the history of the church or whatever it is, right? So it's getting beyond the cognitive. Inspiring reverence is at a different level. We're talking about more of our heart level here. Challenge beliefs and habits of thinking. Reframing something. Thinking about something in a different way. A lecture can be good for that, right? Breed enthusiasm and motivation for further study. That's a good one, right? what I was trying to do in the introductory lecture I gave last week to my ethics class was a high-level framing of what is this business of lived faith, quote unquote, and how does that have to do with Christian ethics, and what is the task, the moral task of Christians in the world. It's a very high-level framing, right, that hopefully a lot of people would follow along and find helpful. It was not at the level of a lot of nitpicky details. It was not an intricate argument of a very elaborate labyrinthine kind. It was a stage setting, right? So one of the things that lectures are actually good at is stage setting, or agenda setting, or mapping in ways that just aren't available to people otherwise, right? That's helpful, right? Beyond that, it's really demonstrating a method, demonstrating an approach, demonstrating a way of doing things, a way of thinking, a way of solving problems. It's demonstrable of something, right? Because what you want people to do at the end of the day is pick up a way of thinking, right? And some skills of their own that they can go away. So in working through a biblical text, the point is not just to work through the biblical text, it's to demonstrate how to do that and teach some skills about what are the choices and decisions you need to make in interpreting a biblical text, right? That kind of thing, right? So within that, the flipped classroom can be good. So in terms of content dumping, lecture's not a very good method for doing that. There's lots of other better methods. For framing, arguing, organizing, that's all a much better approach. Alex Small's comment just above this, I lecture so I can model how an expert approaches problems. He's a professor somewhere in North America in the humanities. I forget exactly what field he's in. So I can model how to approach problems. He wants his students not just to think the way that he thinks, but to learn how to think in line with this discipline and solve problems, right? I think that that's very helpful. Okay? So lectures are going to be good for some things, they're not going to be good for other things. If that's the only sort of tool you've got is your only hammer, it's not going to be very good because you're going to need other approaches along the way. Flipped classroom is a variety of that. Bottom of page 107, I've got a little apologetic there. For handouts, you'd expect the guy who wrote 157 pages to have an apologetic of handout. And I've mentioned some of this before. I do think it's relevant. ESL students find it very helpful to have something, right? If English is not your first language and you're really struggling to follow along with somebody like me, then it's very useful. It's again, interactive. It's a resource. For the future, I tend to always use them.